Hello and welcome, everybody. We have another session coming up now, and I'm Anton. Uh, Here today, I have Pasha with me.
Hi,
Uh,
folks.
he's my colleague, and we decided to have this stream together about very kind of usual topic about server-side development with Kotlin, and we were asking people what do they want to hear, and apparently Spring is still very popular. So Pasha said that he has a lot of experience and tips and tricks to share. So why not to run this session about Spring? So without further ado, Pasha, uh,
Yeah, hi,
let's
folks.
let's check what you have today.
Yeah, let's check. Actually, we can see several interesting comments. Like, it would be fun to have a Quarkus plus Kotlin commercial project. I think it will be fun. I think it won't be useful. Okay, it can be useful, of course. Nothing. I have nothing against Quarkus. I just want to say that Spring is by far the most popular backend development framework for JVM. For maybe for other languages it will be different things, but and the second place is, I believe, Java EE. Am I correct?
Well, to be honest, Quarkus actually supports Java EE with
Yeah.
microprofile, and we did have a session about Quarkus and Kotlin probably already like almost 2 years ago with Justin Lee, who is the author of the integration. Uh, Maybe the comment was about the fact that the person wants to use Quarkus with Kotlin on a commercial project. Well,
Yeah,
it,
probably. Sebastian, you can clarify actually. Great. Yeah. And Sebastian writes that and Spring by far has the most reflection magic. I
Oh, we
I
can argue. We can argue about that actually, but
I
it's
am not
probably
sure.
not the topic of this webinar today.
Yep.
And we should invite Sebastian to reveal what happened with the reflection in Spring with Spring
Yeah.
AOT. So,
Yeah, I mean, Spring is very magical, but I'm not sure. I believe that Quarkus is even more magical, because lots of this magic regarding nativifying of the applications, GraalVM, and so on, they don't actually work for Spring right now, right? Right, out of the box. GraalVM native image, I mean, of course.
they do. They do. Quarkus does support
Yeah,
GraalVM
Quarkus,
native
yes,
image.
but no, not Spring. So I would say that
They
Quarkus.
do with Spring AOT. If you use Spring AOT, it will be
Oh,
GraalVM native image compatible. That's true.
oh, nice.
But talking about magic, computers are magical. So magic is everywhere. Let's talk about magic in Spring today.
Yeah, and actually we'll talk and about Magic in Spring, and not only Magic in Spring, but also Magic in Kotlin. This talk is aimed at people who are more or less familiar with both Kotlin and Spring. It will be most beneficial for them, but it won't be too difficult to understand. I mean, I'm not going to dive in some crazy complications of huge enterprise applications. The thing is, Magic reveals itself on the very basic examples, and we'll talk about it a bit later. And now allow me to jump to introducing myself. I'm Pasha. I work as developer advocate for Kotlin at JetBrains. I'm like 10 or 12 years in JVM. I actually don't remember. I always put some random number here. And most part of my time I've been developing with Java and Kotlin, and of course Spring. And for me, Spring is the king of all frameworks, even though other frameworks are very good too. You can follow me if you want on Twitter, on Mastodon, anywhere else. But yeah, today I'm going to talk about things I learned during my last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of development in Kotlin and Spring. We are going to speak about very simple example, like nano service with one entity responsible for one domain entity, just domain entity of person or user. Of course, the service will include MVC, some validation for this MVC, JPA, and JDBC. And of course, we'll talk about tests just a bit. It's a very deep topic, and probably it deserves its own separate talk, but I won't cover it today. When I start any kind of Spring application, I always start with start.spring.io, and I always select the latest versions of everything, latest Gradle, latest Spring Boot, and of course Kotlin. I will use this generic package for the sake of this example. And I believe you should do the same because it gives us a very good start. And as I said, we will have this, I don't know, small set of dependencies, including test containers and PostgreSQL. And when you will go through this presentation in PDF or online, you can click on full config link and have the same project generated for you. Speaking about the generated project, we have generated only two files, build Gradle KTS and Spring Kotlin start application.kt. And build Gradle is very long. It's like 160 lines, and I won't dive into them. But I actually want to start from the main class. Main class is simplistic. It's 11 lines of code, and it gives us the very basic runnable and running Spring application. It has Spring Boot application on class. Probably if you're familiar with Spring Boot, you already know how it works. It just says that, okay, this class is responsible for handling for having the whole application. And also it has this line, function main with run application with generic type of Spring Kotlin start application. And also we pass all our arcs from command line to the main function. What is this run application? It's an inline function. It's the first function specifically built in Spring for Kotlin, just to have a better way to start our application. Inside, it calls Spring application.run. Nice thing, we don't have to pass this Spring something application dot class, or in Kotlin it would be : class dot java. Instead, it just runs our application by type, and just short and concise, laconic syntax.
It's actually amazing how terse is this line. If you try counting how many features of the language you have in this one simple function, I mean,
I would say
inline,
3.
reified, var arcs, spread operator. What else do we have there? Probably something else I don't remember.
We also have that T should be non-nullable type, reified T derived from any, right here, means that we can't put here nullable type.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not that important. But yes, it's like small magic for Kotlin. I won't dive into all complications. I believe that you know something about Kotlin. If you are here, probably you know both inline and reified. If you don't, please comment, and I will explain it deeply. If needed, I can return back to it at any moment. But yeah, okay, starting application is not enough. I mean, it's good, of course, but again, we want to have some very simple service that will work with some entity. So let's start implementing it. And of course, I always start from MVC and validation. I know there are some people who start from defining the domain, they work with database and so on, but I'm kind of top to bottom person. So I just create controller. And again, if you're not familiar with Spring, then I will explain. If you're familiar, you already understand all the code written here. First of all, it's REST controller. It's a magical notation that says that it will be a REST endpoint mapped to the /person. And of course, we have some method, some function. In our case, it will be post. It will be called by post verb. And we have this empty function body that is called create person, with person as its argument. Person should be valid, and person should be request body. Request body means that we should provide the person inside the body of our request, and valid means that we should validate not only this person, but also all its fields. Like if they have something to validate, we should validate them. That's simple. And I have defined a person like this. It's just a simple data class, no any annotations, no nothing, just name and age. Name is string, age is int. We have a small fight with Anton if age should be double or int. And we eventually decided that int is a little bit simpler, but it can actually be anything for the sake of this argument, for the sake of this example. So now let's try to make our post request to this endpoint. And first of all, just empty post request. We post localhost 8080/person with content type application JSON. Oops, sorry, it was too fast. And we get our 400 bad request answer with all this status 400, error bad request, path, and so on. Thing is, we don't have any validation. We don't have the validation that it should be not nullable. We don't have not null annotation, right? How does it work? It's very simple. Inside our generation build Gradle KTS, we have this small block, tasks with type Kotlin compile, and it means that when we compile Kotlin, we should do something. And this something is, we should add this argument, xjsr 305 equals strict. What is JSR 305? It's annotation for software defect detection, kinda older JSR, which says that we want to have some annotations to be supported on the language level, and all validators should support them. For example, it should be non-null annotations and internationalization annotations, such as non-NLS or NLS strings. And for Kotlin, it means that since we have non-nullable types, and they're explicitly defined as not nullable, it should be equal to having this non-null annotation or check for null annotation. And that's a very cool thing. We don't have to write this additional annotation magic because JSR 305 is supported by Spring and is at the same time supported by Kotlin. Okay, we have posted it. We got our 400 error. Now let's try to post a non-null person, but all the fields of this person should be null, will be null. And of course, we will get our 400 bad request because what? Because JSON property name is missing. And of course, again, it's the same JSR 305 and valid annotation together. Valid checks everything inside our data class, while JSR 305 says that name cannot be null. And the last experiment we should perform with whole predictable result, right? We should pass name, let's say Pasha, and age now. And what is, oops, why result is 200? I mean, it says that everything is fine. Let's just recheck our data class real quick. Oops, I didn't fix age here. So, okay, we have person, and here age is double. It could be as well as be int. It's not nullable. So our JSR 305 should check it, right? First of all, yeah, look, in JVM, primitive types have default values. So in our data class, this age has default value of 0. There are, of course, other primitive types, double, ints, floats, characters, shorts, bytes, and booleans, all of them, but booleans have the value 0 by default, and booleans have the value false by default. And it's kind of issue-ish because we have to fix class this way. We should mark our age as explicitly nullable thing. And also now we have to put annotation on the field, on the JVM field, that it should be not null. Why do we have field here? Because otherwise it will be an annotation on the argument constructor, and it won't be validated by Spring. It's not how Hibernate validation works. It checks annotations on fields or on getters. And it's not too beautiful, but probably it will do its work. Now let's try to post our entity with empty h again. And we get our expected 400 bet request, which is kind of what we want. Also, we have the same error on the back end, field error in object person. On field h, rejected value null. Hooray. So quick summary of this small section is, first of all, it's better to add XJSR 305 equals strict. It will make the validation easier, or if other parts of your application rely on this kind of annotations, it will make them work better. It will make your code clearer, more clear, and more laconic, actually. And also, we should remember that for JVM primitive types, we have to put this field not null and explicitly mark them nullable. So before we will move to the next part, Anton, do we have any questions about this part?
There was a question about validation and extension methods. Let
What
me
was the
check.
question?
Did validation have some problems when using it as Kotlin extension functions? I'm not sure if
I'm
I
not sure.
understand
I'm not sure
correctly.
that. Yeah. Look, validation is a very broad term, and maybe I have to specify it more explicitly that I'm talking about this JSR 303, I believe, 303, right? Okay, there is a JSR for validation, and I'm talking about this JSR with validation. Of course, you can validate your own types with your own ways, but Spring supports this JSR validations, and the most popular framework for validation is Hibernate Validator, and I'm actually speaking about it. I also see the question. It's weird that not null and double. Could you please clarify the question?
I think it's just kind of surprising that you have double. It's an object, and people are surprised
Yeah,
that it converts to primitive.
yeah.
And
I believe it's a matter of optimization. It's a very interesting question because in Java we have this distinction between primitive double and box double, like lowercase double and uppercase double. In Kotlin, we are trying to optimize things. And when we know that double is not nullable, there is no real reason to make it box double. So we just code it as a primitive. But sometimes in very rare cases, like this validation, we have to work it around. I would say that probably we need some annotation in Kotlin, but it's up to language designers. Like I want a JVM boxed object or something like that.
oh yeah, it's a little strange at first, but then you probably have to learn how it works,
Yeah,
and
you're
then it's
getting
not
accustomed
strange.
to it. Yep.
It's I think it's the kind of this interoperability story between Java, because we have Spring and it's a Java framework essentially, and then we have Kotlin, and there are some places where we have this boundary between Kotlin code and Java framework, and this is one of them, right?
Oh, there is an awesome question from Richard Romanovsky. Do you need the same annotation if you wrap H in an inline value class? It's a very good question because actually Spring Boot does not support inline value classes yet. Maybe they will be supported in future, but now it's a bit not relevant to discuss it because we won't know the future details of implementation. However, my way of thinking about it is inline classes should be as cheap as possible, and they probably should disappear in compile time. So I would say that probably we will need this notation too, but I'm not sure how it will work in future. Should we move forward now?
Yep,
I
I
believe
think so.
that. Okay, so we have this MVC. It's definitely not enough because we should somehow store our persons and retrieve our persons, right? And it's where usually GPA comes handy. And also, folks who are aware of data classes and of Kotlin tend to write things this way. They declare some entity class. Entity is a basic primitive of GPA. They declare this class data class. They put some values in it because like age and name are immutable. It's my way of thinking. At least they are immutable in the moment. Probably I will update them later, but not currently. I'm fine with value. And of course, there is no nowhere constructor because I don't need it, right? Well, because I always should provide name, age, and ID, which is nullable, so I don't need to provide it. Database will generate it for me. But here are some issues. First of all, data classes have these methods copy equals hash code and component X, and I said copy 2 times. Nobody pointed at it. Yeah, and we actually don't need them inside GPA, and we are not sure if we will work if they will work correctly inside GPA. GPA definitely won't use these component X classes. Equals and hash code, we are not sure how they are defined. Is it okay for GPA or not? It's a good question. And copy, okay, GPA doesn't know anything about copy. We know, but it won't help in any way. So first thing I do, I remove this class data word and make it just a class person. And this way, I remove all these methods GPA isn't aware of. But it's not enough because we have this value name, immutable name and age, and GPA won't be able to write to value. And actually, GPA doesn't have any real magic inside. It just calls setter by name. Okay, it finds its setter by reflection, but here it won't find this setter. So for GPA to work correctly in this aspect, I have to change val to var, from value to variable. But one issue still remains. There is no NOR constructor, and it's required by the GPA specification because, again, they just call reflective init method. How to make this work is actually a good question, and here we need a bit of magic. We need a Kotlin plugin GPA of the same version of our Kotlin as our Kotlin. The actual version is also 1.8.10, but okay. It is already included into the generated build file because Spring developers know everything about Kotlin plugin GPA and how to make it better. It's cool that we don't have to think about it. But if I would write the application from scratch, I had to discover it. So hopefully, if you didn't know about this plugin, you already found something new in the stock. What this plugin does? It does two things. First of all, it puts annotations on the field. You could mention you could notice that we have this ID annotation on the constructor argument. It's not how it's supposed to work. It should be on the field. Second of all, it adds a default constructor in bytecode, in some bytecode magic. And actually, this default constructor, NOR constructor, doesn't do anything at all. In Kotlin, it won't be possible, but in Java and in JVM, it is, because Java and JVM allow default values for name and age, and this is how our current result looks like. In reality, all the annotations, all the property annotations will lie on fields. And after call of default constructor, which we can't call from the Kotlin, but can call from with reflection, will make age and name null as well as ID. But is it enough? Not quite. At the very least, we have to redefine equals and hash code. For example, like this, we should add this, I don't know, block after the class initialization and put a hash code inside it. And probably the best way to define hash code is just to return a constant, just 0 or something. And equals is kind of complicated, maybe even overcomplicated topic. I didn't find the link, but we had a webinar about how should you correctly implement hash code and equals inside your JPA entities. I won't dive deeply into this topic. It's really, really complicated. Do we have, before we will go to the JDBC part, do we have anything new?
You mean any questions in the chat?
Questions
Yeah,
regarding
we do have mentions of Lombok, of course.
Yeah.
There was a question, I think it's relevant, about Kotlin with R2JDBC, if it has a different implementations of entities. I think the short answer is yes.
I didn't research it. Do you mind sharing a bit?
Yeah. Well, basically with R2JDBC, because it's not really an ORM, object relational mapper.
I see. It's like with JDBC.
It's a protocol, and therefore you design your entities yourself, and then you just use the protocol to
obtain data,
persist your entities. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't think there are any like big questions right now. We can refer at this webinar one more time, because like we have it on our channel. So if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do, in order not to miss any new updates and webinars that are coming. But otherwise, the playlist we have for the server-side development with Kotlin includes all the sessions we run through the years. It's now, I think, the third year we are running it. And there you will find this specific webinar about JPA with Kotlin. And there are a lot of tips and tricks, included in that 1 hour session. You will learn a lot of that.
Okay, cool. So now we have, the next topic is kind of closer to the question about RDBC, because the next topic is JDBC. Again, I'm talking about very simple application. We don't really need R2DBC here. But let's imagine that we need, for some reason, perform a JDBC query. Even simple like this. Select asterisks from users where ID equals something. How would we do it with Java? With JDBC and JDBC template, it would look like this. We have this function or method, probably find by ID. We pass our ID there. Inside, we call JDBC template.query, select asterisk from users where ID equals something. Then we create some mysterious user row mapper. We'll dive in it a little bit deeper. And we pass our ID as an argument, because, we need to define what our arguments are. User row mapper is in turn a class that implements a row mapper that returns person. That actually has, it's like 5 lines. It should override method map row that accepts 2 arguments, result set, and int e. Actually, it's not e, it's actually a row number, but we won't use it here, so we give it some nonsensical name just to not think about it. Then the logic is very simple. We get ID, we get name, and we get we get age with their respective types, and then we return a new constructed person with just obtained values, ID, name, and age. And after that, our thing is probably working. The problem here is there are too many potential row mappers because we want to have different outcomes from different queries, and it's an issue. To avoid it, we might want to inline these mappers, and code will start looking like this. JDBC template query, and again, it's Java code. It's nothing to Kotlin, nothing about Kotlin here. This query, and then this lambda is defined, and then the body of the lambda, and then on the last line we have this parameter. Imagine that we have more complex query with I don't know, 5 parameters. It will be almost not readable, much harder to read, because we have this lambda in between query and parameters. And also, if we have too many mappers, it won't look nice. Why is it designed this way? Why does it work this way? Let's look at the signature of query method. It accepts 3 arguments. First of them is SQL, which is our query. Second of them is row mapper. And the third is vararg arguments, vararg nullable arguments of any type. Because in Java, variable arguments can be only the last argument. We can't put it in the middle. But in Kotlin, this query will look like this. We have JDBC template.query, and then we have all the parameters enumerated, like user ID or whatever parameters we need. And only then we have our construction logic inside a separate lambda. This code is much easier to read. And also, you can notice that we have renamed this unneeded row number parameter to just underscore. It's a special notation from Kotlin. It's how you will name your unused parameters. How does it work? In Java or in Kotlin, we have extension function, which overloads already existing functions. It's function query. It accepts SQL as first parameter. Then it accepts vararg arguments as a second parameter, which is very nice because we actually want to have our parameters right after our SQL query and not after the lambda. And then it accepts lambda, which allows us to have this nice syntax that we have closing parentheses, and then we have our lambda. And if we want, we can even put it on a separate line, and still it will be a valid code. Some people find it more readable, and who am I to argue with them? There are lots of extensions in Spring. Spring Bean, Spring Context, Spring JDBC, Spring R2DBC, Spring Web Flux, Web MVC, and many others. Even for Spring Transactions, we have something. And this is all I wanted to say about JDBC and other extension functions in Spring. Do we have some questions about JDBC?
There is a good comment, I think, about the deprecation of query method in JDBC template, and it really is deprecated. So in favor of the database client.
Wait, what? I checked this code like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I checked quickly in Google if there are any mentions of that. It seems there are, but I have to check the code to actually confirm.
Okay. Look, I have this link. Let me post it into the chat. It's a link to the current 6.0.4 documentation of Spring, and JDBC template is not marked as deprecated, at least for now.
Okay. Well, anyways, I think the highlight here is not that we are using the query method for JDBC template. The highlight here is that we can use Kotlin features to actually enable this kind of extension with better usability
syntax.
for
Yeah.
Kotlin developers in a Java framework. You
Yeah,
see?
it's an awesome thing. It's an awesome thing. We are not bound to have var arguments as last argument, and it makes the code better and easier to read, and
Yeah.
easier and therefore easier to maintain, I believe.
For a moment, imagine that you are not using Spring, but you are using JDBC directly. You can actually create your extension methods, functions, whatever, around the pure JDBC API and have it, you know, uh, beautifully arranged in your application without the need to for the verbose, you know, calls, arguments. You can arrange it for yourself so that it looks idiomatic, as if it's a Kotlin API, not a Java API.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it's what Anton Keks did in one of his last micro frameworks to create applications, web applications. There were um, some extensions for JDBC specifically to make it more readable and just easier to use. Okay, let's move further, I believe. The next interesting question, and I believe it's the most innovative part of Spring and Kotlin integration, is actually a configuration, because all previous things were about readability, but this is a configuration. Usually we need to provide some custom beans inside our application. And in Spring, we have spatial uh, Kotlin bean definition DSL to define beans, which reads like this. We have some value and beans, and we have this beans lambda, and inside it, we just create beans by calling method bean and providing our actual bean implementation. In the comparison, this is how it would look in usual code configuration if we would use annotations to configure our beans. We would have this bean annotation, and then we will have this method Kotlin mapper, and then we will have this return Jackson object mapper, which is just a modified version of Jackson's object mapper that supports data classes, basically. And then we should have this function, Kotlin mapper, that should return object mapper that can be used inside other beans. It's like four lines instead of one for extremely simplistic code. Now let's look at how it can be used further. Let's say we have our own bean JSON logger that accepts object mapper that we created on the previous step, and it has some function log that calls object mapper write value as string if it's data class, otherwise it prints just to string. It's a very basic implementation, oversimplified. Of course, you will need something different, but highlight is different. Look, how do we create, how do we declare this bean? We have this just a method reference to the constructor of JSON logger. Spring itself understands which arguments, which beans does this bean require as constructor arguments, and provide them. As you know, Spring builds the whole graph of dependencies, and after that starts building the whole graph from the leaves to the root. This is what happens here. And also, yeah, and it would be a little bit more complicated if we would use a typical programming configuration, because it's very simple to read. It just defines that we need a bin of JSON logger. That's all. We don't even need to call this the constructor itself. And also, we can put any arbitrary logic in here. Let's look at this small snippet of code. We have bin called random good thing, which is being lazy initialized depending on random. And inside, if again it calls random, if it's true, then random good thing will be Norway. Otherwise, it will be well. Again, it's oversimplified example, but doing it with Java configuration and annotation configuration would be much more tricky, because we don't actually have this ability to define lazy initialization of one bean when it's not defined statically. Okay, now when we have it, let's run our let's return to our very first file with run application sample application. I hope you remember that we have this value beans defined somewhere with beans inside. To make application aware of these beans, we should add lambda to this run application code and add call excuse me, add initializers beans to these applications. Then Spring will understand that these beans are a vital part of application and add them all to the application context, and our application should probably work as expected. And let's run it. Yeah, in my case, application was started in under 2 seconds, which is kind of fine. Hooray, or not. Let's test it. Let's test it just to check that everything works fine. For that, I will define a new component. Component is, as you can know, just a generic annotation from Spring that allows defining our own beans. Now I have class myBean that is dependent on our previously created JSON logger, and it logs just test. It's just thing that does all the everything every time it repeats the same operation, just logs test. And now I want to write test. Now for that, I define Spring Boot test application annotation on it. I create a field in it. Afterward, private lateinit var myBean. Afterward, you're probably familiar with. It's an annotation from Spring that allows us to inject the bean. Lateinit var is kind of way to promise to Kotlin that we will initialize this bean later. It will be initialized at the time of call. And then we have this very simple test called tested that asserts that when we call our test function, it returns the line test. And what happened? Sorry. Yeah, it blows up. It blows up with a message error, no qualifying bean of type JSON logger. But it worked in runtime, right? Well, that's because our tests do not call main. If we think about it really hard, it becomes very obvious. We don't call main inside our test. So how should we work it around? And we have this beans thing. We should define a class. We can call it whatever we want. For example, beans initializer. The important thing, it should extend application context initializer of generic application context. And inside it, we should override a function initialize that will call beans.initialize our context. And this also, in our application properties or application YAML, we should say that we have this additional context initializer classes. In our case, it's beans initializer. And we should remove our lambda from run application. And this way, adding this small glue, this beans initializer declaration and application YAML, we will make the application work, not only work with our newly defined beans, but also work with tests, which is very important usually. And before we will move to the next part, do we have anything?
I don't see any unanswered questions because there were a few questions before when you started explaining the topic, and then you actually answered it yourself with the follow-up slides. My comment on this is that why such a beautiful feature as the add initializers function inside Lambda becomes void if you want to implement tests, right? And
Yeah,
then you have to do this ugly workaround, kind of diminishes everything, all the beauty you had in
I
the
would
beginning.
say rather it's not void. I would say it's just not done enough inside the Spring framework. There should be some magic inside this beans function that declares the bean definition that will register itself inside Spring, and this way will allow us to avoid all this glue code that I don't actually like to. Folks from the Spring itself say that it will probably will be fixed during development of Spring Foo, but as far as I am aware, Spring Foo is not under active development.
It's not, it's rather experimental as far as I know. And when
Yes.
they implement a feature there, they just merge it back to the upstream version of
Yes.
Spring. And it happened with a few features, like this beans DSL was first defined in Spring Foo, and now we have it in the kind of main framework, but it's not really complete.
Yeah. I would say that we need some easier way to declare these beans. Maybe one configuration property in application YAML would be fine. Why do I need a special beans initializer class? Is not completely transparent to me. But you know what is the most disappointing here for me is it's not written anywhere. I had to find it myself somewhere on Stack Overflow. It's not documented. There is some link to the Stack Overflow question from the documentation, but how many links are you going to follow during reading the documentation? I prefer to follow zero, actually. I prefer to not follow.
Oh,
Just to not
there is a
lose.
there is a good comment by Lucas that why, like, it doesn't see a reason why to use the bins definition DSL when you can use the beautiful annotations. And I think it's rather a philosophical question, but I think there is an answer for this, right? Because, like, if you are
Of
using
course,
annotations, they are spread across the application.
it's not the only thing. It's important, but it's not the only thing. Annotations are actually quite limited when you want to put some arbitrary logic in your beans definition. Can you declare annotations with loop? I believe no. And you can easily do. You can just create beans with in a for loop with bin definition DSL. You can do everything. You can, I don't know, load some class from your database and do according to this class, and it will still work. It won't work for
Right.
beautiful notations.
So I would say that it's not that one is better than the other. It's just the different two different things, and you can combine them. By the way, so
Oh, of course you can combine them. And actually, if you would use annotations, you would benefit because you don't need this glue code. And it's a good thing, I would say, because Spring is all about magic, and this glue code removes the magic from us. It makes us to do all the filthy things with our hands, which is not kind
and
of what we want to do.
so talking about reflection, right?
Talking about reflection. What? Talking about reflection?
Yeah, if you have annotations, then you are going into the reflections land.
Yeah, actually, we have reflections here too because we have this meta references and so on. It's kind of reflection magic too.
It's a
It's
compile
more
time
obviously
reflection.
it's a compile time reflection. It's still reflection, and it will cost you something. Not that expensive as reading all annotations on all methods of the whole applications, but it will cost you something. But I like it, and also I believe that it's a bit faster. And as Groovy configuration DSL was a bit faster, I also believe that Kotlin configuration DSL is a bit faster too.
All
I
right.
believe that the answer is given.
Yep.
So now let's jump to the last and also interesting part of our application, because no applications exist without security. We have this MVC endpoint. We should defend it from evil attackers somehow. And you already can see that I'm going to talk about DSLs because we have this beans again, and we will define our bean, our Spring security also inside the bean. How we will do it? We will have this HTTP, which is a reference to HTTP security. This reference to HTTP security is a very interesting thing. It actually goes to the context and grabs HTTP security, empty HTTP security from it, and creates an instance and allows us to configure it. And then we can work with this instance thanks to invoke method on HTTP, as it was your usual Kotlin DSL. So we can define all the nice things. For example, we can disable CSRF in one line, and it won't be your usual builder DSL. I actually hate default HTTP security configuration because it involves lots of dots and calls and so on, and it's not very readable. It doesn't have any hierarchy, or hierarchy any mere human can mention, can notice. And here it is very obvious. We have this CSRF block. Inside CSRF block, we can either disable it or do something more interesting. We can enable HTTP basic authentication like this. And again, it's very readable. We just understand what's going on here. Then we say that we have security matcher, like where should we have our security, and we will have it on our application in this case. And then we have authorized requests block, which is kind of the most important part of the whole HTTP security stuff, because inside this block we will define the actual rules that on /auth/double asterisk we allow only authenticated people, and on any other request we permit all people. And it's very readable and concise. In usual Spring security, it would be a huge wall of text, and only, I don't know, specifically specifically taught people could understand it. Here it's very simple. And it goes as simple as this. The only thing we have to do after configuration, we should say http.build, and at this moment, the whole bean is configured. It knows that it returns HTTP security, and at this moment, we have the security configured. And what I like about it is it is actually one DSL inside another DSL, but it doesn't look alien. It looks absolutely familiar. We have this beans DSLs with curly braces, one inside another, and we have this security right inside our bean definition. And again, this hierarchical structure with CSRF disabled or authorized requests on different addresses. So what did I learn? First, I always generate projects with start.spring.io to not think about minor complications I could face. Second, Reify generics might make an API actually better, like in this run application stuff. Validation is better and easier with Kotlin, but you have to remember about platform primitives. Data classes should not be used for JPA because they have invalid in terms of JPA implementations of equals and hash code. And also JPA is not accustomed to work with values instead of variables. JDBC and JDBC template and future things, I believe JDBC, what is database connection, will benefit from the Kotlin the same way, because you will put parameters right after your query. Bin definition DSL is awesome. For me, I like it. It's very beautiful, and it is specifically awesome with security. At this place, I want to thank you. If you have any questions, it's the best time to ask them. Otherwise, here are lots of content, lots of ways to contact me. Don't hesitate. I love answering questions, helping people, and so on.
Well, it seems we motivated a lot of people to try Kotlin GSL or at least learn about it. The fact is, Kotlin GSL is not a feature. Like, please keep in mind, it's a notion or a term, but it's not a Kotlin feature that you can go and find in the documentation. We do mention it in one place in the type safe builders page, which is actually not a feature as well. Like, it consists of multiple features like trailing lambdas, top level functions, default parameters, lambda with the receiver. That's the ultimate thing to understand about Kotlin DSLs. So if you learn about those features, you can actually make your own DSLs around your APIs, add your extensions to your favorite framework, whatever.
Yeah,
So
actually,
that's very
well, it's kind of feature. I would disagree with Anton. It's feature, but it's feature of language design. The language is designed this specific way for you to be able to build this. What is DSL? Domain specific languages. And here we have an example. It's just an example of how we can compose this domain specific languages, specific domain specific language for bin definition, and domain specific language for security. And folks at Spring, it was, I believe it was very smart move that they allowed it and they invented it for their framework. And you can do it for your application too. Please do. It's a rather advanced topic, requires some learn and some experimenting, but I love it very much.
That's true. Thank you, Pasha. I think it was a very nice session, and some people mentioned that some of the individual parts were worth coming to this session alone. So I think a lot of people actually, learned something from this talk. Uh, we had some questions about the slides and the code. I think we will just add the uh, link to the description of this video, right?
Yeah,
Or
actually,
you
you can see
have
the link. You can see the link to the slides right now on your screens. jbgg/ksw.
right.
Probably you can use it.
And maybe if you have a GitHub repository, we can link it as well, right?
Sure, you can
Good.
find it in my GitHub, but I will post the link to GitHub repository right now in the on the YouTube and on the Twitch both.
Nice. Okay, then I think we can wrap it up. We have another session coming this week, like in 2 days. On Thursday, we have a very interesting session about Arrow, KT, KTOR, and structured concurrency. So don't miss it. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, you should. And well, have a nice Kotlin, everybody.
Have a nice Kotlin.